Hi and welcome. And today we have Bethany Noel Art. So she is the creator of beautiful pieces that display her migraines, but also scenes from nature. And for a better introduction, I let her introduce herself, Beth.
Thank you so much for having me, Bessie. I really appreciate it. My name is Bethany Noel. I make paintings about migraines and nature. You can think of it as Alice in Wonderland meets Narnia. And they're large scale, intricate acrylic pieces that are about me seeing the world with my chronic condition, but seeing some of the good side of the world that it lets me see through.
So let's start there. When you say it's a chronic condition, obviously, because people don't think as migraines as that, and there are a lot of invisible conditions that actually affect people's lives, right? So you've decided to turn this around and say, in the power here. I'm going to show you what I see. So when did you decide to take this journey and to actually sort of like give your migraines a vision for the regular folk like me that could never even imagine this?
Yeah, so migraine is actually a condition that affects, it's one of the most prevalent and damaging neurological conditions out there and has a huge impact in GDP and productivity and whatnot. Something like 15% of the population has it. Obviously, not always as severe as mine, but it's a huge, huge problem. And there isn't a lot of solutions for it. So as far as why I started making it, I've had this condition for over 20 years of my life, and I've had so many different types of therapies and medications and everything else, you name it, to try to manage it. And one of the problems is when you go through an attack, and with chronic migraine, it's not always that, it's not really a simple process. Frequently, it can be a multi-week attack. Sometimes an attack can slowly creep up by over the course of months. So you just manage an extremely high pain level and symptom load for quite some time daily. And so, but you start to not believe things were as bad as you thought. You start to be like, oh, it can't be this bad, or I must be going crazy or whatnot. And so I started to paint my actual experience. And that was a way of taking power back to myself and not being so, the migraine, periodically attacks me and takes control of my body. And I wanted some way to have some agency and to stop being gaslit by the medical community and by my own experiences, and to find some way to find the silver lining. It's one thing to have a chronic condition, but that much pain, it's really easy to succumb to despair after it. Managing it, it's really exhausting. And so I was trying to also find a silver lining in all of it, find something beautiful. And I historically studied a lot of biochemistry. So I get to see things that people take drugs to see, and I take drugs to stop seeing. So that's why I started making this work.
So you mentioned two things that are super important. You know, that being gaslighted by doctors. We've had guests that have also spoken about the discrepancies of the medical field. And obviously we need doctors, like God bless doctors, but it's hard, right? When you have a chronic illness like that. So for you and for anyone who might be watching out there, how also, besides the art, besides taking control of your chronic illness through this art, how did you advocate for yourself and how did that feel?
Yeah, thank you. So I have, first of all, I'm a white cisgendered woman, so I have some privileges in the world, but I'm still a woman, and there's a whole bunch of medical stuff out there that, when we research, other people can probably cite better than I can. Where it's known that women aren't taken as seriously. Pain isn't believed as much. There's a lot of things saying it's in your head. It's we're being hysterical, right? that whole narrative. So, and especially it can be really exhausting. The medical industry is not really set up for it's not set up for making it easy, right? To just get a referral to a doctor, to get that paid, to get on the wait list for another specialist. Sometimes you have to go through your in-network specialist before you can see the next specialist, and you name it. Sometimes you have to take whatever the insurance company deems as the appropriate next medicine, not jump to the medication that your doctor actually wants. So what I've really learned is I built myself a team of doctors that are really fantastic. And that takes time. I literally had to make job decisions based on healthcare, determine when my neurologist changed practices and went to Beth Israel. I made sure that I followed her and made sure that all of my doctors are in that network. And now I send an email and I get a response within a couple hours from any of them. And they all talk together about my care. But it took years, and it took not giving up, and it took asking for help and not putting up with being treated as grateful for a minimum amount of care. I remember one of the first times when I talked to my existing neurologist, I started going through the whole list of, I've been through all this stuff. These are all my experiences. This is all this stuff. I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. Here are my migraine journals that I've put together because I'd been prepared to manage it because I'd had to. And she asked me how one medication was, and I was like, well, it didn't really have any bad side effects, so I guess that's good. And she basically started crying and said, that is not the standard. The standard is, did not hurt you. The standard is getting you better. So I found people who did that, who actually treated me like a person, who would listen to me when I sent them research articles and ask about feedback that actually supports me and talks all about the condition and the science behind it, and doesn't brush me off and treat me as, well, hysterical.
Yeah.
And my migraines are much better under control than they have before, but it's a condition that there's only very recently been a lot of therapies that are specifically targeted for chronic migraine.
The second thing you said is, I take medicine to not see what I see. So, but when you do that, when you are seeing what you see, you have one of your pieces, well, you have a few of your pieces behind you, you're at the studio. So it's beautiful, right? And it looks like nature. I've seen some of your pieces and it looks like such it's like a hurricane of color, or sometimes it can be so dark, and sometimes they're just like these glowing visions. That's the best that I can do to describe it. And then you just said, I take medicines to not look at that anymore. So what is the reaction of people when you explain to them, oh no, this isn't just a forest, or like, this isn't just like a kaleidoscope of colors? Like, how have you developed a description for your art that is easy for people to digest? And, as an artist, how have you also advocated for your art?
I'll take you back to a little bit of what happens in a migraine. So a lot of people might think of them as the Excedrin migraine commercials, which are complete garbage. It's just acetaminophen and caffeine in a pill. I can tell you it doesn't work. But most of the time, so there's a lot of neurological symptoms associated with migraine that aren't just pain. There's what we call macroscopia and microscopia, and these are classically what you think of as acid drug symptoms. It's the Alice in Wonderland. I'm bigger than my world, or I'm smaller than the world, or the corridor is lengthening, or there's a collapse in perspective. And then probably about 30% of people with migraines get what we call ocular aura. So that is what I experience most of the time. And ocular aura is not a physical impediment in your vision, but a neurological artifact. So basically, sometimes I'm seeing things like pixie dust sort of magic lights superimposed my vision. Sometimes it feels like a heat haze in part of my vision. Sometimes certain parts of my vision, I know there's data there, but I can't interpret it. And sometimes there's sort of a black hole of swirling light and color. And sometimes I'll lose vision in quadrants of my perception for weeks, you know, and it's not like you can generally work around it in the same way if you have, there's a lot of different other conditions where you sort of learn how to operate. But because of that, I see it all the time. And so because of all of these things, the world I see when I go into a CVS or the grocery store is frequently painful. Fluorescent lights, lots of shiny colors, lots of repetition, and it makes me feel really dizzy. I don't always dissociate that information. Now, when I go into the natural world, all of that stuff that happens creates that feeling of I get access to this other world. I get access to, you know, what we might think of as the mundane, and I can see it for this glorious cacophony of light and shadow and line work and whatnot. So when I'm painting, I'm actually trying to create a lot of those optical effects. So yes, it's representational of nature and whatnot, but it has this pixelation that I'm trying to deliberately do to create those feelings of that oscillation, of that flickering light. And hopefully the goal is to create the emotional experience of being there, not just the photographic representation of place A or place B. And that is how I try to, there's a lot tied up in that, but I try to capture, not only use the actual technical creation of the painting to create some of the, to make it look gorgeous to look at, because that's important for attracting someone, right? You know, why do something, you know, we want sometimes things to look pretty in order for them to get looked at. If my work didn't look good, you might not want to actually think about the bigger problems, the other things involved in it, right? So the other things you were asking about was like, how did I learn to describe all of this stuff? How did I learn to advocate for myself? I sold my first painting when I was about 14, 15.
Wow.
And I had been, and I remember I told the person the price, and I had a lot of people been like, oh, that's ridiculous. You shouldn't ask for that much. And I was like, I'm asking for not enough, right? Like you're wrong, right? You know, I shouldn't feel thankful. I have a skill, right? And if someone doesn't want to buy my work, that's perfectly fine, but I'm going to value it based on what I think it's worth. And so part of that is learning how to advocate for myself. So a lot of my non-art jobs have been in business. So I deliberately tried to give myself an on-the-job MBA. So I looked into how to do sales, how to do financial administration, how to do operations work. I'm in IT. So learning a lot of the different things necessary in order to actually do the other side of the work, which is frequently not talked about. And in order to do all of that, you know, we talk about the elevator pitch in business, but if I want to communicate my work, I want to make sure that people can get it without having to read a dissertation, that you can have an emotional reaction without knowing critical art theory, in the same way that you can listen to music and get goosebumps and not be able to sight read. If you could sight read, maybe it's better, but that isn't a necessary part of it. Right. So the elevator pitch helps get interest and make it accessible and not a sort of a classist thing or a problem of access.
So these are wonderful tips. Yeah. And, you know, this is great. These are wonderful tips for any, you know, artists out there that do want to sell their art, or any kids. You know, now we have social media and you can see so many talented young kids and young adults that maybe don't have the resources to go to art school or else. But what you're explaining is you can still educate yourself and build yourself up with tools that are also accessible online, right? So the more you learn, the more you learn about your business, because art is a business, the better you are prepared to advocate for yourself. And I love that tip. Thank you for sharing that, because that's what we don't think about, right? And yes, artists deserve to be paid for what they do, because it is a skill and it takes a lot of effort.
For someone who's looking interested in art, I've chosen to sell my artwork. I think art has extreme value, whether or not you want to make it a business. And a lot of art is learning about, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's about learning about studio process and how to show up for your work and how to discipline yourself. There's a whole plethora of things that it provides, even if it's not a business. And that's not the value that I necessarily put on it. I'm okay with selling my work, but that doesn't mean that it's only good because I'm able to sell it. And the other part is I got a scholarship to go to art school. I could not have possibly gone without it. And in a lot of ways, it wasn't just the scholarship that let me go. It was the fact that someone gave me permission to not do something, to do something risky.
So that's wonderful. And thank you for clarifying it. Yes, you don't have to sell your art, or yes, you can, and it doesn't mean you sold out, right? It's just whatever you're comfortable with, but it's still a skill. It's still an asset to your person, right? And also to be able to just advocate for yourself, whether it is in the business sense or any other sense. Like, we need to understand how to value our skills. And so you just went into what I wanted to ask. It's like someone that doesn't want to sell their art, and maybe someone that isn't as skilled, because you just say, you sold your first painting at 14. Clearly there's talent there. I like to do watercolors, but like I literally do rainbows because that's my skill set. but it's a great just stress release. So for people that are just discovering, again, with social media and COVID keeping us in our houses, a lot of people went into, like I said, watercolors like me, or handwriting, or, doing other types of art. But what is that long-term benefit of just really staying with art as a form of therapy or stress release? What has art done in your life for you, not just for representing your migraines, but for enriching your life?
I don't know how to answer the question without being a fundamentally different person. I used to think that the fact that I was sort of addicted to art, that I desperately needed to create in order to feel sane, was sort of a curse. It was like, why couldn't it have been programming? Why couldn't it have been something with a clear monetary and clear security line? Why did I have to sort of fall in love with the most difficult possible? Unless I was a poet, I don't know if there's a lot more difficult career paths. However, then I realized that I was really lucky. There's a lot of people who don't know what they want to do and don't know what that thing is, to give them a way to express themselves. And I think that it's extremely valuable to be able to create in whatever medium that is, whether it's baking or sewing or writing, or you name it. Right. So there's a lot of different ways that happens. And we are creative. Humans are creative by nature. We fundamentally like to make things. Without that, I think there's a lot of, for me, it's a really strong way for me to connect with myself and center myself and feel sane and happy. I'm sure you might know people who are gym rats and they'll get itchy if they don't go to the gym for a little bit. And for me, it's a really similar feeling. If I'm not in the studio for a bit, I will feel itchy and restless. It's really, really centering. Some people might be able to achieve that through meditation or you name it, but I find that there's been all of the skills that art can teach and creation can teach are invaluable in everything else. A lot of the management skills and that I've learned over the years have come through my studio practice. I've become a better person in so many different other ways because I had to solve problems in this place.
Mhm.
And learning how to do that and to be self-disciplined and to figure out solutions for things that I wouldn't have been able to do outside of that. So I think that painting rainbows and or I have friends who paint little D&D figurines or you name it. It's great. It's
Mhm.
something that's not, and I love video games, not knocking that, but it's something that's separate from trying reading someone else's story or playing someone else's vision. It's something where you get to tie your body into the creation of something else.
As an artist yourself, what do you wish people would do to advocate for the arts? To understand that, yes, we need art education. Yes, art is important. Yes, we need space for artists. In your dream world, what would we as citizens who have a vote could do to help artists?
I feel for the owners of this building. They kept it as artist studios spaces for 37 years, but they want to retire. And
Mhm.
right now, there is no possible organization, state, or nonprofit or for profit that can come in and buy an art building. The only option for people, if they buy a building, make it for artist spaces and whatnot, and want to take out their equity, is to do it in a commercial way.
Mhm.
So that's one problem. There's one nonprofit that's being started up, just trying to raise about $5 million just to help. We're giving owners an exit plan and help giving some initial funding for artists that are building. It's called Creative Grounds, and they're working on it. $5 million is not a lot in commercial building development. It's really not. But what happens if I buy a building and I keep it for artists and whatnot, and I do it and I put all of my money and time and energy in doing that for 40 years, and then I want to retire? It's either going to have to, getting another artist to be able to buy that is extremely rare, right? So there's one thing right there. That's a huge, huge gap. And that means that we need supporting organizations that fund these things. We need legislation and now allowing for right of first offer for artist spaces. Sometimes that there's some state representatives arguing for that for residents, so that, for example, if a landlord sells their building, the leasees have right of first offer rather than being sold initially. Uh, so then, and then the power of the state to be able to actually have funds to buy and secure the buildings or create some funding options specifically for the arts. This is happening across Somerville and Boston and Cambridge and you name it. Right now, Humphrey Street Studios are being sold off. Central Street Studios, there's a number of different dance and theater places that are being sold off. This is happening all over the place, and we simply cannot compete with private money for a plethora of reasons. But the main part is we're not property developers. And so if you have someone whose job is to make as much profit as possible in the selling and developing of a building, you also have, it's not the same thing as trying to get a coalition of artists who are frequently not trying to build wealth just to secure a place to work. And so if you have rules and funding and organization to do that, there's also zoning that needs to happen. You need buildings and whatnot that can actually be zoned appropriately so artists can work there, and other support for that. So I recommend paying attention to what's happening in your local community, checking out your zoning, going to town hall buildings, checking out your planning, your local town's planning committee, writing to your local representative. One of the biggest problems I've had is the effort in order to politically organize, as well as move studio and do press and do all that stuff. It's just a lot. So it'd be great if there are people who are willing to take on some of that work and helping organize.
Thank you. Um, and then, just to end on a good note, because yes, this is definitely a bigger problem, where a lot of us need to get involved and where government needs to be held accountable. And private money can't override community needs, right? But that is a process. what would you recommend to an aspiring artist? Like if you were 14 or 13 starting right now and you do have a skill and ability for the arts, what would you recommend they do to keep going?
The rule in any arts is play your scales. You know, you're not going to be a really good musician if you don't practice your scales. You can't do a jazz solo if you don't know what key it's in, and you can't do that off the top of your head. So for me, playing my scales is sketching. I'd recommend following whatever that is and doing that daily. The other thing is a lot of sketching people think is sometimes people think about a pretty journal, and it's not about pretty journal. A sketch is about a place where you can make mistakes. And as long as you're working on it really daily, you have a place to contain your mistakes and have ideas. I can't tell you the number of times I've pulled old sketchbooks and pulled a sketch that I didn't think was really good at the time. And that's the painting I'm working on now. And it's really, really valuable because those ideas, when you can get them when you can get them without being self-conscious, those are going to be those seeds that you're going to build into stuff later on. So there's that. Sometimes in life, different things aren't considered very sexy, right? Like, especially when you're 13 and 14. So I'd say do what you actually want to do and not whatever you think is necessarily the coolest thing right then, because it becomes cool when you're much later on, I promise you.
Thank you so much for taking this time and giving such great advice and realistic advice, which I love and appreciate. And yes, we will put the link to Bethany's website in case you want to get involved with this movement to support artists and also to check out her art and see how unique and beautiful it is.
Thank you so much.